So, can everybody hear me first of all? Okay, good. I keep looking to my right because you guys are over on my right. So, I have you over there, screen in front of us. Um, Hopefully you can see my screen. I've got the 1 to 4 family contract in front of me from our portal. And then I'm going to jump over to this summary real quick. So, your first rule of thumb, if you're brand new with me, you know you need to be learning the contract every day, working on a page of the contract, reading it, and trying to really understand what it says. Because the one thing that drives me crazy is when new agents think, oh, I'll learn the contract once I have a buyer, but by then it's too late. You like way too late. You have to, it's your job to write up the offer and then I'm going to review it and fix it and clean it. But your job is to 1,000% make sure that you're you know how to write up the offer to begin with. I'll know really quickly if you've never looked at your contract when you're trying to give me an offer to review. So start learning the contract, number one. Number two, before you write an offer, you always want to get on the phone and talk to the listing agent. And for my younger agents, sometimes you guys don't like to talk on the phone, but you got to call the listing agent. We want to know, we want to have a conversation with them and say something like, hey, I'm getting ready to put in an offer on your property. Is there anything I should know that I don't see in MLS? And try and uncover if it's a chatty agent, which they shouldn't be, but if they are chatty, then they may tell you way more information than you ever wanted to know or need to know, or they can give you a total advantage. You want to try and find out how motivated is the seller? When do they have to be somewhere else? Why are they selling? The more information, the better it can give you a total advantage. So get on the phone and talk to them. Check the MLS for attachments. Make sure you pull the survey, you pull the seller's disclosure, any other disclosures that are needed. Some of those are required for the contract. So you need them. If they're not in MLS, then you need to call the agent and say, hey, email them to me. I don't really ever want you writing an offer without seeing the survey, seeing the seller's disclosure. Like, I don't even want to show homes without seeing at least the seller's disclosure because there may be things on that disclosure that keep my buyer from wanting to buy it. So why am I going to waste my time showing a home that they would never buy? So always check MLS, look at the attachments and check for those things. Make sure you talk to the lender if they're doing a loan and find out like, you know, your buyer may tell you how much they're putting down and what they think their closing costs are, but you want to make sure the lender and the buyer are on the same page. So make sure you talk to the lender. You need a pre-qual letter from the lender anyways. I always want my pre-qual letter to match my offer. So talk and find out, do we need closing costs paid for in this contract? That's really important to know if you're putting it in the contract from the beginning or not. You never want to ask for more closing costs than you need, so you need to get that amount from the lender. Confirm with the buyers too. How do they want their name to appear on title? Because how you put their name on the actual contract is how they will take title. And sometimes they want middle initials or middle names or junior or doctor or whatever. So you need to find out. Also find out like, do they want the fridge or anything else that should be that normally isn't conveying? Do they want it to convey or are they expecting it to convey? I always, when I'm showing the homes, I'm telling them, the fridge, washer, dryer don't typically convey. We can ask for them. Do you want them or not? And then we're making it part of the contract if we want them. If MLS says they do convey, they technically don't convey unless you're putting it in the contract. So if I have a listing and I say the fridge can convey, but you give me an offer that doesn't ask for the fridge, then I can go sell the fridge on Craigslist tomorrow or Facebook Marketplace and make some cash on it because you didn't include in the offer that you wanted the fridge. So it's really important you guys are checking all those boxes, paying attention to all of that. When you write the offer again as a new agent, you've got to draw it up before I'm going to review it. No blanks allowed. And I'm a stickler on this. I want my agents, I never want you to submit an offer that screams, I'm a brand new agent, take advantage of me. And the way we do that is because we're not going to leave a bunch of blanks. We're not going to leave boxes unchecked. We're not going to put the wrong thing in the wrong blanks. We're going to know what we're doing when we submit these offers, and they're going to look impressive to agents. That conveys, I know what I'm doing. You better not mess with me. I'm going to be tough to negotiate against, right? Like, the last thing we want to do is be like, I'm brand new, I don't know what I'm doing, and take advantage of me. Nope, nope, nope. We're not doing that. Okay. Don't write an offer late at night. If you go show home at 5 o'clock and the clients are like, this is it, we want this one, we want to put in the offer tonight. You need to say, that's great, but I am tired, you're tired, we're not thinking clearly. I'm going to write up based on what we discussed. I'm going to write up the offer first thing tomorrow morning. I'm going to have my broker review it and then we will get it signed off on. You do not think clearly late at night. I don't think clearly late at night. I'm in bed by 9 o'clock at night. If you ever need me after 9, you're not going to get me because I'm up at 5. So don't do things late at night. We don't have to. This is not brain surgery. The house will still be available tomorrow morning if it's available at 8 o'clock at night. Okay. Um, Again, you need to understand what each paragraph says. I'm going to go through and summarize each paragraph now. So take notes. This will be recorded. You can watch this 100 times. It really is important for you to be able to present the offer when your clients, if you write it up in person or if you are docu-signing it to them, the first time they sign it, you should go through it with them. So you need to be able to look at the contract, look at the bold word for the header of that paragraph and know what's in that paragraph. I don't expect you to know that paragraph 1 is parties, paragraph 2 is property, paragraph 3 is price. Like you don't have to have that all memorized. But I want you to be able to look at the bold word parties and know how to explain what that paragraph means, if that makes sense. One more thing, contract versus amendment or addendums. So once the contract is signed and executed, like everybody initialed off on all the changes, we have a final execution date. That is cast in concrete and you cannot touch that document ever again. I can't tell you how many times people are like, oh, I just wrote it on the contract and changed it. Nope. Once it's executed, you don't touch it. If we need to change it, we're going to amend it with an amendment. And so anything that has to be changed is an amendment. If we're adding to the contract, that's an addendum. So common addendums are non-realty item addendum, third-party financing, the HOA addendum. Those are common that we would add to the contract and make it part of the contract at the time we write the offer. Sometimes we have to do an addendum after the fact, like we've executed the contract, but now the seller needs a lease back for a few days. So I'm going to do an amendment to add the seller temporary lease to the contract. And so then at that point, I'm doing an amendment to add the seller's temporary residential lease to paragraph 22, adding it officially to the contract. And then we're actually filling out that addendum. We'll go through that more later. Don't stress too much about that, but just note that the difference between an amendment and an addendum. And you all need to remember that the minute the contract's set title, it's executed, all parties have signed off, it's in stone, we cannot touch that paperwork. Okay, so here's our 1 to 4 family. The first thing to note is that the most recent change was in November of 24. So always make sure you're working with the most current up-to-date contract. There are 20 different forms up for contract changes now proposed that will be coming. 20, did I say 2020? Yeah, a lot of changes coming. So when the minute those new changes that are proposed get approved, I will start teaching you about them. I'll talk to you about when officially you have to start using that new form. And that's what happened in 2024, the end of 2024. We did contract changes because of the lawsuit stuff. And then these had to start being used January 1st of 25. And so I want to make sure you guys are always using the right one. 1 to 4 family. So 1 to 4 means a single family home, a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex would be written on this contract. Not vacant land, and not commercial. And anything over 10 acres is usually going to be on a farm and ranch. So if I have a house on 5 acres, you can use this. If I have a house on 8 acres, you can use this. The minute I have a house on about 10 acres or bigger, it's on farm and ranch. But 1 to 4, we're using that single family home. Okay, let's get started. Condos have their own contract too. How do you know if it's a condo? Sometimes they may be condos, but they look like houses. Look at the legal address. Is there a survey? If it has a survey and the legal address has a lot and block, then it's going to go on this form and it's not technically a condo. If it's saying that you get partial ownership, and the legal is not a lot and block and there is no survey, then it's definitely going to go on a condo contract. Okay, now we're 10 minutes in and we haven't even started the contract. Let's get started. And guys, if I go too fast, I'm going to try to go fast because there's a lot of information, but feel free to unmute yourselves and yell at me any step of the way, please, please, please. This is for you guys to learn. I usually love to do this class in person because people will ask more questions in person, but the minute you're thinking the question, somebody else is, so please ask it. There's no dumb questions, I promise. Okay. Paragraph 1 is the parties. Parties meaning the seller and the buyer. The seller, if I'm the buyer's agent writing an offer, I need to look and see who is the seller. I'm going to check MLS under seller, and sometimes the agents list and sometimes they don't under owner. But I'm also always going to pull tax records and make sure that, because sometimes agents will let the tax record populate the listing, MLS listing, and maybe only one seller came over. If there's 3 sellers to a property, all 3 names need to be here. The minute the names don't fit, we're adding an extra page and listing the sellers. Don't worry about how to do that right now. Just note that all sellers must be on this contract. If it's a divorce situation, the divorce is not finalized. Both spouses need to be on this contract. I don't care who's getting what in the divorce. If the divorce isn't done and it doesn't, if it's not done, then it doesn't matter. Everybody's signing. If it's an estate sale, so let's say the listing says John Smith is the owner, but you're reading through it, it looks like John Smith died and this is an estate sale, then the seller is the estate of John Smith because John Smith can't sell the home, he died. So we need to make sure we get the seller information correct. Then buyers, we're going to ask our buyers, how do you want your name to appear on title? You're putting it there. Warn them if they want first name, last name, and a middle name or 2 middle names, then when they go to do their loan paperwork, the lender is going to put all those names on all the loan documents and they're signing that name, all those names on every piece of paper for closing. So just warn them of that. But some people really, really care and some people don't care. So we just want to be respectful. How do you want your name to appear? Okay. Paragraph 2 is the property. This is identifying what am I buying? What are we selling? Now, the one thing I want you to make sure you always get right is the legal address. So we're going to go on MLS. I should have been in MLS. I wish I was in MLS. Sorry, guys, I'm not in MLS. Okay. You're gonna look at MLS and see what does the legal address say. But then I'm also gonna go to tax records and confirmed, is that the right legal that matches tax records? If I'm buying, let's say, a house with the lot next door all on one contract, then I'm getting 2 lots and both lots would be listed here. So the legal address is how the property conveys, that's how title conveys it, and that's how the lender conveys it. It doesn't matter the street address. So it could have no street address and I'm still conveying property. I could have one legal address and the street address is a totally different address and I got it wrong. I'm conveying what the legal address says, not what the street address says. So it's really, really important we get that legal address right. Usually if it's in a typical neighborhood, there's going to be a lot and a block, and then that next blank will be like the name of the subdivision, maybe the phases or the sections. That's where all that goes. If it's rural land, then there may not be lot and block. It could be Johnson Survey, northeast corner portion 5.3, like it'll be all weird. And that's what you need to put over. All of that will be on that right side line. And you will also include the total acreages in your legal address the minute it's rural. And if you can't find the correct legal address, you may have to go pull a prior deed as to when that property conveyed and include the legal address there. And again, that becomes a lot of wording and we're adding a separate page to convey the correct legal address. It's really important to get that right. City is obviously city, county is obviously county, street address is going on that other line right here, and then the zip code. Okay, B, C, and D. I love in Kahoot, in our company meeting, I'll ask Kahoot questions around this paragraph. You need to know what the words are on these paragraphs. So what improvements are expected to convey with the property? What accessories are expected to convey with the property? And then D is if the seller is taking the curtains with them, or the seller wants to take the security cameras that are screwed into the wall. Anything permanently attached is supposed to convey. So the minute the seller wants to take something, it would go under D exclusions. I personally, if I'm the listing agent and my client's like, oh, I'm taking those curtain rods with me, then I want the curtain rods off the walls and the walls painted and patched and all done before we even go on the market. Like I make my clients remove that light fixture that you want to keep before I go on the market and put up a cheap normal light fixture. You know, like you don't want to mess with, if you're the listing agent, you really don't want to deal with exclusions right before closing on this contract, A, because you could forget to put it on the contract and now it's conveying and your client's really mad at you. But B, like your client can go the day before closing, remove the light fixture and it damaged the ceiling. It created a hole. Like the other light fixture they swap and put up instead, the buyer doesn't like it causes problems. So if your seller is going to exclude something, get it dealt with before you go on the market. If you're the buyer, though, look at MLS because sometimes it'll say the planters attached to the front wall of the house do not convey. So you need to make sure that's listed on the contract appropriately. And you need to make sure your buyer realizes it before they execute a contract. So any questions on any of that? I want you guys to make sure you understand those words in there because it's really important, especially like um, if you're the listing agent, you need to make sure your seller knows they can't take things with them. They can't take down the brackets that hold up the TVs. Those convey. The TVs do not. The TVs are personal property, but the brackets, the mounts, those are expected to convey. Things like that. We got to know all that. Garage door openers are expected to convey. If you put on the seller's disclosure there were 3 garage door openers, then you better have 3 garage door openers at closing in that house ready to convey. Things like that. Another problem we run into are like security systems, the Ring doorbell, right? It's not only the doorbell that has to convey, but the seller has to release that address off of the contract so that the buyer can then get the address and the seller doesn't have access to it. Those kind of things. All right. Any questions? Moving on. Okay.
Hey, Carlin, sorry.
Yeah. No, go
So,
for it.
I know with this is just from experience too, but just to FYI with everybody. So I had that same issue with that off-market listing. We had it on the market and then it went off and I ended up
Mhm.
getting an offer. So when that happens, does that still apply? Like since they're going in there and basically seeing the house as it is, what do you do in that situation?
So it's basically this offer is written at the time of the home's condition, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So if there are things in the home at the time they viewed the home that shouldn't be conveying, then you've got to put it in exclusions. But if
Okay.
the seller's already taken those things with them because they've moved, then you're not worrying about it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay.
So
Okay.
you've got to think about it as the home as it sits at the time this offer is executed is what this is all based on. So, and that will be important when we talk about insurance and condition in a minute. Just note, like at the time I wrote this offer, I saw the stainless fridge in the kitchen. So I want that stainless fridge conveying on my non-realty item addendum, and we'll talk about all that. But yeah, good question. All right, sales price, paragraph 3 is what am I willing to pay as a buyer? Seller, what am I agreeing to convey it for? What is the price? Line A is the cash portion, your down payment. Line B is if I'm getting a loan, that's my loan amount. And A plus B should equal C, the total contract price. If I'm getting a loan, I need to make sure I'm marking third party right here. And then I'm going to attach third party in paragraph 22. If I want owner financing, I would mark that, or if it's a loan assumption, I'd mark that, but those two are not nearly as common as the third party. If it's just a cash buyer, then A is your full contract price, B is 0, and C is the total price that matches A. Does that make sense? That's pretty easy, pretty straightforward there. Just note, like, hey buyer, we're getting ready to write the offer. Have you decided, are you putting 5% down, 10% down, 20% down? If it's FHA, it's probably 3.5% down. And then you're talking to the lender and being like, okay, according to the buyer, he's doing an FHA loan, 3.5%. Is that still what you think they're doing? Yep, that's it. Okay. So then A is going to be 3.5% of C, and B is the balance, the difference between the two. All right, paragraph 4, leases. So sometimes you may represent a buyer who's an investor who's purchasing a home that's leased, and that lease stays in place. That lease does not go away if the home conveys in a sale. So you have to honor the lease. It's subject to those lease terms. That's where you're marking A here, subject to the lease. Sometimes there's fixture leases for like solar panel or water softener or security system. If your buyer's buying a home with one of those leases in place and they're willing to take on that lease, then we're marking it here under B. If we don't know if it's leased or not, you're still going to mark it on B, and we'll talk about what to do with it in a minute. Natural resource leases. These are very, very rare in our area, especially on a 1-to-4 family contract. Usually if we're talking about like mineral rights, that's a separate addendum, and that's usually going to be a farm and ranch contract or a commercial contract. So natural resource lease, very rare on 1-to-4s, but fixture leases can happen in residential leases. If you are a buyer, representing a buyer, who's buying a home where there are solar panels or a water softener, I would please beg you not to allow your buyer to take over those lease payments. It is the worst thing a buyer can do. You need to make the seller pay off that lease before closing, and then that way the buyer owns the home with the solar panels and they're paid for. Most solar panel deals are like the worst scam in the world. Don't even get me started. But just that's just a side note. Okay. Moving on. Paragraph 5 is our earnest money and termination option. This is a paragraph that's really important that you learn how to explain to a buyer and a seller what this paragraph means. So typically your earnest money deposit, I tell the buyer it's good faith money. I'm putting money at title in good faith that I'm going to close on the purchase of this home. I want your home so badly. I'm willing to put, and it's typically 1% of the contract price. So on a $400,000 home, we're going to do $4,000 in earnest money. And if you're representing the buyer and you're asking the seller to pay title and you don't really care who the title company is, then ask the listing agent who's your preferred title company. Look online on MLS. There's a place where they can put their preferred title company. You're going to put the title company and closer, if they want to specify specific closer, on the first line. Then the address of the location of the office is on the next line. Then this 1% isn't, you don't do 1%, you do the actual dollar amount, but I just put that 1% there to remind you it should be 1%. So you see the dollar sign forces you to do a dollar amount. So if I'm writing a $400,000 offer, I'm going to put $4,000 there. Then the next line is our option fee. Our option fee is giving us a termination option period. It relates to paragraph B down there. And right now for like a first time home buyer price point, we're seeing about $100 for a 7-day option period. They may counter you and want more. And you may need a 14-day option period. I have a buyer buying a home with a septic right now, and we did a 14-day option period. So I paid, we paid a little bit more for that. But your buyer is using that $100 to buy time to get the home off the market and get it under contract for them, and to decide, do they really want this home or not? And in that 7 days, they can terminate for any reason whatsoever, and they get their earnest money back. Now, earnest money and option money are paid up front at the time we go under contract. They're paid to the title company. They're going to cash that check and hold it right then and there. So your client has to have that money. Even if the buyer is buying VA no money down, or doing a grant program with no money down, USDA has no money down, they still have to have 1% earnest money typically to go under contract. And then sometimes we can arrange to get that money back at closing because they're doing a no money down loan. If you negotiate for the seller to pay all the closing costs, you can get it so that they get it back, but they got to have it to begin with. So we got to talk to them and make sure we've got that money. Both of those amounts are due to the title company. And here's something I really want you to understand is that we are delivering within 3 days after the effective date. So the effective date, I'll show you where that is on the contract in a minute. The effective date is day 0. And then the next day is day 1. And everything that has a timeline on this contract follows that count. So within 3 days of the effective date. So let's say the effective date is today. Today is Thursday. Thursday is day 0. Friday is day 1. Saturday is day 2. Sunday is day 3. This says I have to have my earnest money and option money to title by the end of day 3. Now, by the end of day 3, title's closed, so I can't get it to them. So it's got to be before they close. However, Sunday title isn't open. So then it falls to the next business day that they are open. Okay. If Monday was a holiday, then it would fall to Tuesday. Just note that. Any questions on that? I'm going to keep going unless there's questions on what I've covered so far. Okay. This next paragraph, 5A1, has 2 blanks. I want you to put NA in all blanks if they don't apply. Don't leave blanks because it shows that you've read the blanks and you know what you're talking about and you know what you're doing. We don't leave blanks. But you're very rarely going to use this paragraph. This paragraph is, let's say your buyer's a USDA loan, 0 down payment. They don't have all the earnest money right now, but they really want to submit the offer today. And so I say, okay, buyer, how much earnest money can you do right now? And let's say the total earnest money is $3,000 for a $300,000 offer, but they only have 1,000 right now. So I would put the 1,000 up here under this because I'm committing to getting this $1,000 within those 3 days. But then we're willing to do the other 2,000 down here, but not until he gets his tax refund, and he's going to get his tax refund next week. So we're going to do 7 days right there. Does that make sense? So if you need to split that 1% into 2 payments, that's what paragraph 1, subparagraph 1 is. It's very rare that we do that. Most sellers, like, why would I tie up my home if you don't even have the earnest money to put on the line? But sometimes we want to split up the earnest money because it's a large amount of money and there's strategic reasons to do that. But that's what that's for. It's very rare you're going to use it. You're just going to put NA in those blanks. All right. The rest of this paragraph is talking about how the escrow agent, the title company, is considered a third party, impartial to either side. They cannot favorite either party. They are just there to handle the transaction. They are considered an escrow agent and hold the funds in escrow. When they get those funds, it will first be applied to the option fee. So let's say my total due to title up here on the first part up here, my total due that I have to pay to title is $4,000. That includes my option fee and my earnest money. But let's say I accidentally only wire 3,000 of the 4,000. So that means that this paragraph says I've paid my option fee, but now I've defaulted on my earnest money because I didn't get all the earnest money there. The minute I default on getting my earnest money there, the seller now has the right to terminate the contract. And in this day and age, the seller probably doesn't want to terminate the contract. They're grateful for a contract. But when we were in multiple offers before and prices were going through the roof really, really fast, sellers were happy to get out from under contracts because there was another buyer who's like, oh my God, I just missed out on this home. I would have paid 50,000 more. You know, I really want the home. Well, great. If the buyer defaults, then I'll terminate the contract and you can buy it, right? Like, but otherwise the seller doesn't have an out in the contracts. It's really important to understand. Buyers have out, sellers do not. I've covered all this really fast. You guys are gonna have to listen to this thing a million times to understand it. And I'll help you when we're writing the offer. Well, you're gonna write the offer and then we're gonna talk about the changes to make and why, and I'll help you work through these things if they're still confusing. Termination option period. This is a big one. This is the only timeline in the contract that has a time that ends at 5 p.m. All the rest of the timelines end at basically midnight. So your third party financing addendum ends at midnight. Your lease back ends at midnight. HOA delivery is midnight. This is 5 p.m. That used to be midnight. But what we ran into is that agents would wait till like 9 o'clock at night on the day of the option period ending and try to start negotiating amendments. And we're like, this is bullshit. We're not doing this. We're putting in a normal timeline of 5 p.m. I personally, as a listing agent, I will warn agents, buyer's agents, like, hey, do not come at me at the last minute expecting us to negotiate a bunch of stuff. You know, if you want to try to renegotiate something, give me some time, give my seller some time to decide. You know, the last thing you want to do is start calling the listing agent at 4 o'clock on the day this is ending and saying, hey, we need a new roof replaced. You better agree to it by 5 p.m. Like, no one's making those kind of big, huge decisions in an hour. So, and some sellers may not even be available at 4 o'clock. Like, so what this paragraph says is the buyer can terminate for any reason by 5 p.m. on that 7th day. Again, if we execute a contract today, it's day 0. So 7 days would give us Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 5 p.m. The buyer can back out by 5 p.m. What that creates is some leverage, maybe, to negotiate and address any concerns. So the way most of these contracts are going to be marked is they're going to be as-is contracts. Crystal, I'll get to you in 2 seconds. So they're as-is contracts, meaning at the time I wrote this offer, what I saw in the home, the way it looks, the way it smells, based on the seller's disclosure at the time I wrote the offer, if I have the seller's disclosure, based on all of those facts, here's what I'm willing to pay for the home. And as long as those facts don't change, then I'm buying it the way it is. But let's say I buy it and I go into my option period, I then do an inspection, and now the inspector has uncovered things I didn't know about. Now I can perhaps negotiate and address those concerns, or if the seller's not willing to address those concerns, I need to terminate my contract by 5 o'clock on that 7th day. That's what this period creates. It creates leverage. Some agents think it forces the seller to renegotiate. It does not. The seller can say no. The seller can say take a hike. The seller cannot even talk to you or respond to your request. They shouldn't, but they sometimes do that. Okay, Crystal, question.
Okay, so the option period starts when? The day that the day after they sign the contract?
The clock starts counting the next day. So today is day 0. So next day is day 1. And it's like whatever the number is there, you've got the 7 days or the 8 days or the 14 days or the 2 days, whatever it is.
And is 7 days like, is that like the normal, like the norm that people usually do? Or like
Seven's
does
pretty
that
normal
enough
right
days?
now. Yeah, so it's all negotiable. What I recommend is if you're helping a buyer with a first-time home buyer price point, you would offer $100 for 7 days. 7 days should give you enough time to do an inspection. It should be plenty of time. If the home, like this one I'm doing tomorrow, has a septic, so I did a 14-day option, but 14 is a lot longer time off the market, and I can bust for any reason, so we paid more than $100. Or if the home is a higher price point, you may be paying more than $100. You may offer 150, 200. A multi-million dollar homes, the option fee may be a lot more. In multiple offers, it can be really high option fee in a really short option period, or we could do no option period. So it's all negotiable, but I'm just kind of giving you the normal guideline for the market, the way we're seeing it right now, for a first time home buyer price point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
Okay.
it's so that the buyer can do like all the inspections they need to do and decide whether or not they
Yep.
actually want to go
Yep.
through the contract.
Exactly. Like in the option period, I want my buyer to drive to work at 7 a.m. and make sure they like that drive. I want them to see the home, maybe before the offer, you see the home like Tuesday at 2 o'clock, Thursdays at 7 p.m. and Sundays at 3 p.m., right? Like the neighborhood looks different at different times of the week. So I want my buyer to do all the due diligence, make sure the schools are where they want to go to school, make sure there's no proposed changes to those schools for next year. Like we want to do all that due diligence, get homeowners insurance in your option period. Day 0, we're ordering homeowners insurance, we're checking clue reports. I want to uncover as much as I can about this home in that option period to decide, is this really the right home for me or not? That's what this period's for. And sometimes, like, we call it the buyer remorse period. Sometimes buyers just like freak out and go, oh my God, what am I doing? And they're, buying a home and they now are overwhelmed. They're talking to their lender. So a lot of times, especially in this market, the buyer will talk to the lender today, start looking for homes, but we don't go under contract for 2 or 3 more months. Well, in 2 or 3 more months, the interest rates could have gone up. Like right now, thank God they're kind of coming down, but they could have gone up. And now we're under contract and I don't like my payment because it's too high. I want out for that reason. So there's a lot of things we're doing in this option period to make sure we want to move forward. Good questions. So the way we explain this to our buyer is, hey, buyer, what we're doing here in this paragraph is that we're saying, seller, we're so serious about buying your home, we're willing to put 1% of the purchase price in earnest money at title. Title's going to hold on to it. That earnest money and the option fee are both applied to your closing costs at closing, and your down payment. So it's not like you're losing that money. It's just telling the seller you're serious enough that you're willing to put that money on the line to see it through to closing. If you terminate during the option period, those 7 days, you lose the $100 because that was what you paid for the right to terminate, but you're going to get the earnest money back. There are other outs in the contract where you may get the earnest money back. We'll talk about those when we get to them. Okay. If you ever are in a situation where your buyer cannot get their earnest and option to title by that 3rd day on time, like sometimes the clients fly into town, view a home, pick a home, but leave and go back to California, and now we're having to wire funds and the wire took longer than they thought. You need to call me as early as possible on day 3 and say, hey, I don't think my client's money is going to get to title in time. I will then personally pay their option fee and get it to title on time so that at least we have an option period to be able to terminate, because we don't want to lose the right to terminate. And if you fail to pay that money, the $100, we don't have an option period. So make sure you always get me involved if we're up against the timeline and you think there's going to be a problem getting that money to title. We will always make that happen one way or another. Okay, let's move on. Paragraph 6 is the title policy and survey. There are classes, and there's one recorded somewhere on our YouTube channel just for this paragraph. This is a huge paragraph. It's 2 pages long, and it is a lot of information. I'm going to do the best I can to give you kind of a brief synopsis of it, but just understand there's a lot to it. So what we're doing here on this paragraph is we're saying the same title company that's on paragraph 5, we're asking the seller, and it's typically a seller's expense, for the seller to provide a title policy to the buyer. And then the buyer will also have to provide a lender title policy for their loan, but that's a separate fee. And we're asking the title company to issue the policy based on these specific parameters. What is a title policy? A title policy is an insurance policy that would pay out if somebody tried to come back and claim ownership to the property. And it sounds like it's very rare and would never happen, but damn, when it happens, you really need this policy in place. And it happens because Texas is a community property state, meaning that people have rights to this property when it conveys, like estate sale. Let's say for fun, you're buying a property and it's sold as an estate sale a couple of years ago. Well, let's say somebody lied on the paperwork and one of the heirs wasn't notified of the sale and didn't get their money. Now they can come back and say, hey, this was sold without my knowing. My brother and sister cut me out. They had no rights to cut me out of it. I didn't get my fair share. This property is mine. The title policy would then kick into play to make that party whole, to make them go away, to pay them out. So the policy, while it's very rarely used, when it is needed, is really, really important. And things happen. I was at a closing early on in my career, and the title company, the way it works is that, like, they'll issue a title policy based on these parameters, and they'll make the seller sign documents making sure that these parameters are in place. But sometimes sellers lie. So let's say a seller lied. In my case, that's what happened. My seller signed the document saying when they bought the home, they were not married, but they actually were married, and I didn't know it. All I knew was that they were divorced when they were selling it, but they were married when they bought it. And the problem is that that spouse could have had rights to the property, and the title company should have known about it and should have figured that out and cleared that issue before closing. But my seller lied through the whole transaction. I had no idea till after the fact, and we walk out of closing, and then they make a comment, an offhanded comment to me about it. And I'm like, oh my God. And I just hoped and prayed that that spouse never tried to claim ownership to the property, and it didn't, and everything was okay. But had that spouse heard about the sale, the ex-spouse had heard about the sale and had he had some rights to the property, then he would have come back and attacked, the policy would have paid him out, and then the title company would have gone after that seller to get reimbursed because the seller lied at closing, is how that would have played out. But the thing to understand is that a title policy is an insurance policy and will protect the buyer if there's claims of ownership to the property, except for in certain circumstances, and that's what the 1 to 8 kind of spells out. It doesn't cover like the rules that affect your property. So if you're buying a property and there's homeowners association rules or deed restrictions, or if on the survey there's easements, if there's pre-existing mineral rights that are not conveying in this transaction, those kind of things, they're saying we do not cover those kind of issues. Here it says we do not cover marital rights. So again, the title company is going to go based on what the seller's telling them in those documents. But if the seller lied, then the policy would pay out and then go after the seller. Paragraph 8 is talking about survey coverage. So an extra protection to a title policy is coverage for disputes regarding a survey. And you would think a survey is official and perfect every time, and it's not. There's good surveys and there are bad surveys out there, and you just don't know what you have. If you're buying a home on any kind of acreage land, you really want this amendment to protect you for your buyer. So you would do 8 and then you'd mark number 2. And then typically it's a seller's expense because the seller's already paying the title policy, but it's all negotiable. Just note that. If I'm buying a property in Plum Creek, for instance, where it's lot blocks and those lot blocks haven't changed, the fences are in the same place they've always been, there probably isn't going to ever be a dispute about boundaries. So I wouldn't worry about it in that case. But there could be a dispute when it's on acreage. I had buyers they did not have this coverage when they bought it, and the survey they had showed the fence and the property line in one place. Well, the survey was wrong, and when they went to install a new fence, they were just going over the old fence, but the owner in front of them said, hey, that's wrong, that survey was done wrong, this is in the wrong spot, your property line is actually 10 feet back over here, and now we're in this lawsuit. Everyone's suing everybody because they thought they owned these 10 feet of land. They really didn't. And had this title policy been in place with this amended protection, it would have paid and made it all better. But unfortunately, we didn't have that protection in there and it was a mess. So if it's on acreage, get the protection. If it's lot block, I always say rule of thumb, if you're the buyer and it's not multiple offers, ask for the protection anyways. It's better to have it than to not have it, just to be safe. But if you're in Plum Creek and the seller's like, I'm not paying for that, your buyer probably doesn't need it. It's very, very rare that you would ever need it. But on acreage, we definitely want it, okay? The only way they're going to give you that protection is if the survey is fairly recent and new, it may force a new survey. So just keep that in mind. Commitment. So what this is saying is that the title company will have 20 days from the time you execute that contract to provide commitment for the policy. The commitment will specifically spell out what's included on the policy and what's not. When you get that commitment, it's really important you review it. You're going to get with me and be like, what the heck does this say? What does it mean? Again, there's a whole class that title offers on reviewing title commitments and what they mean. So in the future dates, you're going to want to take those classes. But for now, just that's what that understands. Okay, we're still under paragraph 6. And now we're going to talk about the survey. So one of the things that can affect title is the survey, which we just talked about a minute ago. Here's where we're saying, how are we getting our hands on a survey? Now, to sell a property, a survey is not required. However, I would never want a buyer to buy a property without a survey unless they are like 100%, I don't care, fine, that's up to them. If it's cash. If there's a loan involved, a survey is required. A lender will always require a survey. What you've got to ask yourself is, if there's an old survey being provided, is it good? Should we use it? Or is it really old and maybe things have changed and maybe we need a better survey? Or maybe like one time I sold a property and I had a survey, but I look at the survey and there's no pool, but I look out the back door and there's a pool. That is a pretty worthless survey. So you need to look at those things and say, is this a good survey or not? Should I really have it convey or not? If you want the survey to convey, then you're marking C1 and you're giving the seller like 3 days, 2 days to provide the survey along with the T47 affidavit. The T47 affidavit is a form that is signed by the sellers that says nothing has changed since the survey was done, or I built and added a pool since the survey was done, right? Like that form will be used with the survey and provided to title, and title and the lender will review them and decide, does this new survey need ordered or not? And then the second part of this paragraph says, if a new survey is needed, who's paying for it? Is it a buyer's expense or seller's expense? Typically, it should be a buyer's expense, because if the buyer's lender, the buyer has to get a loan, their lender's the one requiring it, it should be on them. However, in a non-multiple offer situation, I would ask the seller to make it a seller's expense and then make them counter me on that term, if that makes sense. So you're gonna give them 3 days to get you the survey in T47. They may have already given you the survey in T47. Hopefully they did. I really don't want you writing an offer without seeing it. But you still have to put that in here, like they have to officially, once under contract, give it to you, so you're putting it on here. If they fail to give it to you, then it immediately, in that timeline, in those 3 days, if they fail to deliver it, then it immediately becomes a seller's expense to get a new survey. So if I'm the listing agent and I meet with my seller and I know there's no survey, like today I'm about to go shoot photos and videos on a new listing, we don't have a survey. We tried to find it, there is no survey. I will never want an offer with C1 marked to be executed, because then that's forcing my seller to pay for a new survey. And that could be an expense an agent ends up eating, and it happens often because they're like, oh crap, we didn't have a survey and I just let this contract execute saying we're going to provide a survey and we don't have a survey. So it's really important. Is a T47? No. So IRS is asking, if we get a new survey, is there a T47? The answer is no. But the minute the survey's a month old, 2 months old, 3 months old, then yes, a T47 is needed. But if I go under contract and then we do a survey, no. Because what could have happened a month ago is that then they added a planter or a gazebo or something could have changed. So, but if it's new, then no. So let's say I don't have the survey. So on my listing that I'm putting on the market tomorrow, I'm going to say in private remarks, we do not have a survey. All offers, if you need a survey, please mark accordingly. And they need to mark either C2 or C3, and then we're going to negotiate. C2 says that the buyer can get their own survey, and it says how many days they're going to get it. If you represent the buyer and you're getting a new survey, you need at least 14 days, or you may be paying a rush fee, just so you know. Or maybe you're asking the seller to get a new survey. If I'm the buyer, I want the seller to provide me a survey. I'm going to try and negotiate to get the seller to give me a new one. But if I represent, I'm going to confuse you guys even more. If I represent the buyer and the seller says I don't have a survey, I'm still going to mark C1, and I'm going to make them counter and change that paragraph in hopes they accidentally forget and don't counter and change that paragraph. And now I've made the seller pay for a new one. Some agents are so crazy that they'll mark C1 and put only 1 day to deliver the survey. And if you fail to deliver it in that 1 day, you're buying a new survey. So make sure you don't ever accept one of 1 day, or be prepared to get it delivered. Questions on any of that? I know that's a lot. I feel like I could talk about surveys for 2 hours. Okay. Objections. Let's move on to objections. So basically what D says is, based on everything provided to the buyer in the first A, B, and C parts, the buyer can object and terminate if something that they wanted to do can't be done on those documents within a certain time frame. So let's say I have a buyer and they want to breed hedgehogs, but we haven't seen all the deed restrictions. We haven't seen the survey. We don't even know, we don't know anything yet. But I know my buyer wants to breed hedgehogs. So I would put the activity of breeding hedgehogs here. And then I'd say I have 7 days to review all those documents and we can terminate if it says you can't breed hedgehogs. Does that make sense? Now, where agents really screw up is I've had agents put on here to install a pool, but the problem is that these restrictions in the survey may say we can do a pool or not, but there could be other things that can affect whether you can get a pool or not. So like if you're in city limits, the city will have the right to say whether you can get a pool or not. That has nothing to do with here. And so you got to understand that this is not a total protection. The other thing you have to understand is I'm listing my breeding hedgehogs here, but it's up to me as the buyer's agent and the buyer to review all those documents to decide if I need to use this out or not. No one's telling you to use the out. Like title's not checking it for you. So you've got to make sure you're checking it. This is just giving you an out if you need it. Normally there's not an unusual activity. So normally it's just, I want to buy it and use it as a house and I'm going to keep my dogs there or whatever. So then you could either say single family residence, which this is a single family contract. So some people would say that's redundant, but I don't like blanks. So just say single family residence. And then the objections would be typically 7 days. You don't want to do any shorter than 7 days for a buyer objections. One time we had a buyer put like 2 days to review. The problem was those documents were sent to them on a Friday. That gave them Saturday and Sunday to review and terminate. And they didn't even see the email until like Monday or Tuesday. So they missed their opportunity to terminate because they put too short of a time frame. So you never want to put too short. So 7 days and the usage, the activity, or we're just going to see single family residence, and then we can leave the 7 days blank or put NA, or don't put NA. This is the one time where I'm going to let you have a blank, because if you leave it blank, then it's the closing date. It defaults to closing date. But if I'm not putting anything on that activity line, then I don't have a specific out. I'm not outlining an out, if that makes sense. There are, though, below that line, there are other words in here that talk about if there's issues around title. So those documents come back, like, okay, this is a great example. I have a listing, we went under contract, and when the title documents came back, the commitment came back, there was a $30,000 lien on this home that nobody knew was on this home. And now my seller wasn't making enough to sell the home. They could not pay that lien off and sell the home. So this talks about what happens in that case, should that happen. And I'm not going to go into the details of how all that spells out right now. I want you to start reading it. We'll learn about it as we go. But just know those are called clouds on title, and we have to cure the cloud one way or another. So in the case of the lien, we have to pay the lien off at closing, or we have to make the lien go away, get a release of lien before closing. Those are the two options. My seller couldn't do either one, so we terminated the contract. We let the buyer go. My buyer is filed for divorce the very next day because the lien was having to do with the spouse and not her. And so she filed for divorce the next day. They were already going to get divorced. It wasn't because of this. She filed for divorce the next day. We were waiting for the 60 days for the divorce to go through. She's getting the house on the divorce. He's leaving. That title issue will be resolved once he's gone, and it's just her house, and we have proof that he left, and it will no longer affect them. So that's how we're handling that. But it can get really messy and crazy. Just note that the minute there's a title issue, you're calling me and we're talking about it. Okay. E are other ways title can be affected. Membership in an HOA. This is one of the blanks you're never leaving blank. It is either in an HOA or it's not in an HOA. There's no other option. So we can't leave a blank because it's one or the other. And is it in a mandatory? If it's a volunteer HOA, then it is not mandatory. So you're saying it's not. HOAs can foreclose in the state of Texas, so they have rights to your title should you stop paying your dues. Now, if they foreclose on you, your title policy is not kicking into play because you didn't pay your dues. This is where it's spelling out you're obligated, you got to pay your dues. You're going to sign something in closing that says that too. But just note that that's what that's talking about. Statutory tax districts, there are special tax districts where there may be fees, taxes involved to help pay for like water or other services. So this is saying, hey, you're on notice, buyer, that those kind of things could affect your title. Tidewater, so this is a Texas contract. So these contracts are written to handle situations all over the state of Texas. So some of these don't apply. Tidewaters do not apply. Annexation. Annexation means the city is annexing and making it part of their jurisdiction. This is talking about, hey, buyer, you may buy something that's in an area where the city can annex it and take it over. Then you're subject to city taxes when that happens. So this is just putting buyers on notice that that could happen, perhaps if your property resides in that area. Service utility districts, same kind of thing like the water. Certain areas to get the sewer and the water lines all put in, they create maybe a taxing district to pay for those things. A public improvement district's like an HOA, but maybe it's open for the public instead of specifically just for the homeowners. Transfer fees can affect title. Propane gas system. This is not a propane tank on a piece of property. This is the whole community's propane instead of natural gas. That requires a special addendum. There's only a few of them in our area. There's like one out in Dripping. There's one in Driftwood. La Ventana is a propane gas system. There's a couple of them. This became a hot topic several years ago when propane gas got very, very expensive and people were paying like $800 a month to heat their homes. It was a whole crazy thing. So that became an addendum. Water level fluctuations. So if your property is anywhere near your lake level, this is a special addendum that's putting you on notice that the water level can change. Mold remediation's another one. If the property's been remediated for mold, the seller has certain obligations to provide to the buyer. Required notices. So if any of the things above apply, then there may be a specific notice required, and that would be listed here. If you as the listing agent failed to put the notice in the contract, you are now giving the buyer an automatic out until they sign that notice. So the last thing you want to do is like provide the notice at closing, and then the buyer can be like, what the hell? I didn't know about that. I don't want to buy it. And they can walk and they can get their earnest money back. So you want to make sure if it applies to the property, it's in this notice here. Property conditions. We talked about again in the beginning, when we write the offer, we are writing it based on the knowledge we have at the time we write the offer. So we should have a seller's disclosure and we should have seen the property. And based on those things, we are either accepting it as is or not. And the first part is the disclosure. Well, let's talk about 7A for a second. 7A spells out the seller is going to allow a buyer and the agent access to the property at reasonable times so that you can get it inspected by inspectors that are licensed. That's really important. The disclosure part, we're writing an offer, we have the disclosure. If we don't have the disclosure for any reason, let's say the home just came on the market yesterday, they haven't finished disclosure, I want to get in an offer before anybody else gets in an offer, so I'm writing an offer and I'm saying B2, and I'm giving them 3 days to get me the disclosure. I want that disclosure pretty quickly. Once I get the disclosure, I automatically have 7 days to terminate if there's something in it I don't like. But I really want it before I even write the offer, because if it says, what if it has foundation problems? Well, I don't want to buy a home with foundation problems. I wanted to know that, now I've spent money on an option fee and I'm losing that option money because I didn't know it because I didn't have the disclosure. So we really want the disclosure ahead of time. C says if it's built prior to 78, I'm adding the lead-based paint addendum. And then the as-is condition paragraph. So all of our contracts are written as is, meaning as is the time we wrote the offer. As is based on what's in the seller's disclosure. So if your seller's disclosure says the garage door opener doesn't work, and you've signed saying with your offer, you say, I have the notice at the time I wrote the offer, and I'm accepting it as is, then you're accepting that you know that garage door opener doesn't work, and you don't get to go renegotiate in your option period. I mean, you can try, but if I'm the listing agent, I'm going to tell you to stick it because you knew it when you wrote the offer. You should have known it when you wrote the offer. So keep that in mind. We're marking as is usually, unless we need it like professionally cleaned before closing, or we need the roof replaced before closing, or we need foundation work done before closing, or if it's on septic, then I want the septic to pump it. We talked about this in our septic class the other day. So if I need something done before closing at the time I write the offer, then I'm marking 2 and I'm spelling out what that thing is. The minute you're spelling it out, make sure you're asking me for the language, because the last thing you want to do is say seller to replace the roof. Well, you didn't say to remove the old roof. You didn't say to repair any rotted wood. You didn't say to replace the jacks on the roof or to replace the vents. You didn't say what color of roof shingle. You didn't say what year of roof shingle should I use, right? Like there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. So we want to make sure we're getting the wording right. Am I missing my, if you guys are asking me questions for some reason, unmute yourselves and ask, because like I'm getting a weird number, but I can't click on it. Why? Oh, there we go. Hold on. Oh my gosh, come back. Chat. Oh, all right. I already answered that. Okay. Lord almighty, it's a lot of stuff. That's why this class is an hour and a half long. Okay, we're gonna be done by 11:30 though. Lender required repairs. So this spells out that if the lender requires a repair to be done prior to closing for them to do the loan, either party can pay to do the repairs, but the repair has to be done, period, or we're not closing. If it is a lender required repair and the amount exceeds 5% of the sales price, the buyer has an automatic right to terminate. So let's just say a buyer wrote an offer, maybe didn't see the property in person, didn't realize all the things wrong with it when they saw it. And now the lenders come back saying it needs foundation work, it needs a new roof, all this stuff. And the seller's saying, I'll do all that work. But your buyer may be saying, holy crap, I had no idea it was in this bad of shape. I don't want you to do the work. I'm not buying this home. This is giving the buyer an out because all that work is totaling more than 5% of the sales price, right? But if it's less than 5% of the sales price, the buyer cannot back out if the seller's agreeing to do the work. Now, if the seller doesn't agree to do the work and the buyer doesn't have the money to do the work, then we're not buying the home because the lender's not going to do the loan. Does that make sense? Okay. Oh. Okay. Completion of repairs and treatments. So any lender required repairs or other negotiated repairs, this paragraph says that they must be done 5 days prior to closing and deliver receipts to the parties proving it. And if the work is required to be done by a licensed professional, it must be done by a licensed professional, which means if I have a seller who's a handyman and I think that the buyer may want GFCI outlets installed because the home's old and doesn't have them, I'm going to warn my seller, like either do them now before we go on the market, or just be prepared. They may ask you to have an electrician do them and they're not going to let you do it. And the handyman's going to be like, oh, that's ridiculous. I can do it. The only way you can agree to allow the seller to do them himself is if you change the amendment wording and make sure that you will get permission for the seller to do them, because otherwise the contract's saying an electrician has to do it. And GFCI outlets are pretty easy to swap out. So anything like electrical, HVAC, plumbing, all those require licenses, so they have to be done by licensed professionals if it's a repair negotiated as part of this contract. Oh my gosh. Okay, environmental matters, very rarely, like knock on wood, nothing around here. Asbestos is an environmental matter, but most of the time we're just disclosing we don't have a clue. And buyer beware kind of thing. H is your home warranty. So we heard from Fidelity yesterday on home warranties. This is where you're putting in a dollar amount. And right now in this market, you can ask the seller to pay $700, $800 for a home warranty. And what this is saying is that the buyer gets to pick the home warranty company and what plan, and the seller is going to pay up to an amount that's in this paragraph. So you are going to want your buyer to be like, hey, like after my buyer consultation, I usually warn the buyer, like, I'm going to try to negotiate to get a home warranty paid for. Here are the companies I recommend, check them all out, see which one you're going to want to use, and then we'll ask for that amount in the contract at closing. Paragraph 8, that's the broker or sales agent licensed disclosure. If you're a principal to the transaction or you're related to a principal in the transaction, you've got to disclose it here. Paragraph 9 is your closing date. Do not pick a weekend, do not pick a federal holiday, and make sure your clients are going to be there for the closing. The last thing you want to do is just to pick a date yourself and make sure the lender can meet that date. Like, don't put 2 weeks if it's a loan and the lender needs 30 days, right? Talk to the lender, make sure everybody's all on the same page. Typically, loans can close in 30 days. They can close sooner sometimes, but talk to the lender first, make sure they can if you're trying to rush it. So this is saying it's going to happen on or before that date. The minute it's going to close after that date, we got problems. We've got to extend the contract, amend the contract, change this date. This spells out what's going to happen at closing. the seller's gonna provide a general warranty deed to the buyer. That's how they're conveying title. The property is going to be paid for in good funds acceptable to the escrow agent. So the title company gets to say, hey, I need the wire ahead of time. Hey, I need, if you're giving me a cashier's check, I want it 2 days in advance. The title company gets to dictate all of that. The seller and buyer are going to deliver all notices, statements, certificates, affidavit, anything affecting lien. They're all going to comply and make sure they transfer. If there's a warranty, if you're buying a home with a foundation warranty in place, that warranty will usually have a transfer window. You need to make sure your buyer transfers it into their name within that window. Usually it's 30 days and sometimes there's a fee involved. So this is putting everybody on notice about all this. This is also saying at the time we close and transfer, there will be no liens or assessments of any kind due on the property. So like I said before, or I didn't say this, I had a seller once, this was a long time ago. They had a water softener on the home and they thought, and they were making payments on it, and they thought they could just keep making payments after closing. And so we're under contract, we're set to close, and all of a sudden we realize there's a water softener lien on the home. And the title company notifies me, and I call the clients. I'm like, hey, I didn't realize you guys still owe money on this water softener. They're like, yeah, our payment's $200 a month. We're going to keep paying for it after closing. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. Something doesn't get to convey with the home that still has an outstanding lien or balance due. That water softener has to be paid off at closing. And so that took the money they thought they were getting down. It reduced it by that payoff, which at that time was like $7,000, and they had a heart attack. But that's the rule. Okay. Possession, paragraph 10. Typically, it's going to be on closing and funding. So closing takes place when the buyer signs and the seller signs. It's two different parts that happens at two different times, usually on the same day. And then funding is the lender's piece. So both parties have to sign. Title takes all those documents, gives them to the lender. The lender reviews and says, yes, now release the funds, and that's funding. And nobody gets keys until it's funded. So what can happen is, let's say it's on a Friday, it's 4 o'clock before the seller signs. You may not get funding for that weekend. Like, you never want to schedule closings for Fridays for a lot of reasons. So we're going to try and close on Wednesdays or Thursdays earlier in the week. But you just need to prepare people. Funding can take a while. Funding can run into the next day at times. So it's really important. Consult your insurance agent. You want to make sure that you have the right insurance coverage. And this is in here because the other possession piece is according to a lease of some kind. A buyer can lease ahead of time. If you're going to do that, talk to me first. Or a seller can lease it after closing. The seller then becomes the tenant. The buyer becomes the owner. Now I need tenant renter's insurance if I'm the tenant, and I need owner's insurance as a rental property for a hot minute if I'm doing that kind of situation. So that's why it's saying consult the insurance company. Possession, this is just spelling out on the smart devices what possession means and why the seller needs to release possession of any kind of security equipment, doorbells, all those kind of things. They've got to remove all those connections. Special provisions, you're never putting anything in here unless you talk to me. Just pretend it doesn't exist. Okay. Paragraph 12. So a big change to our contract a year ago is this bad boy. This is where if your buyer needs some money paid for their closing costs by the seller, we're putting it in C, and B is where you're putting your commission. So it spells out and typically 12A or 12A 1B is where we're going to put our 3% commission. This is saying, hey, seller, the buyer agreed to pay me my commission, but we're asking you to pay for it on the buyer's behalf. That's where you're doing it. And then, hey, seller, my buyer also needs you to pay $5,000 in their closing costs or $20,000 in their closing costs. Whatever the amount is here, just note that that's really coming off of the sales price, right? Like if the listing just went on the market yesterday at 400,000 and you offer 400,000, but you're asking them to pay 12,000 in their closing costs under C, then you're really not offering 400,000. You're offering 388 and rolling up the price to 400 to cover those 12,000 in closing costs. Does that make sense? Everybody following me on that? When you are asking for closing costs to be paid for your buyer on behalf by the seller on behalf of your buyer, you need to make sure you talk to the lender and don't ask for too much. Because if you ask for more than they can use, you don't get it back. You don't get to renegotiate that amount. Sometimes sellers will let you, but there's nothing in the contract that forces them to do that. So it's important you don't ask for too much. Okay. Oh my gosh, this is long. Okay, prorations. The rest of this is much faster. That was all the meat and potatoes. Prorations, basically property taxes, insurance, mortgage payments, HOA assessments. The owner pays them through the day of closing, and the seller starts paying the next day after closing. Same thing with utilities. Seller needs to keep utilities on through closing date, and then they transfer to the buyer starting the next day. That is one thing I failed to mention really quickly under condition is that utilities will stay on through right here, this last paragraph, seller at seller's expense shall keep utilities on through closing date. If your client has a vacant listing, the minute it goes under contract, they're going to want to turn those off. They cannot turn those off per this contract. Make sure they know that. So that's what prorations is talking about. Casualty loss, oh my gosh, I can't talk. Casualty loss is saying that the home is going to be in the condition I saw it when I wrote the offer. So if something changes to the home, if it changes to the condition, you got to disclose it and deal with it. But if something happens, a fire happens, I've had a hailstorm take out skylights, then this paragraph goes into play and says the buyer has to make it whole again before closing, or if they need more time, an automatic 15 days extension is in here. And if it goes beyond 15 days, the buyer can terminate, or you guys can decide to negotiate an amendment. And that happens. Like we'll have tornadoes crazy come through and take out homes or trees that fall on the homes. And like we've had that happen. So this paragraph does happen. It also talks about the seller needs to keep their insurance in place because they've got to repair those things up through the day of closing. The seller is responsible through the day of closing. Default mediation basically says if either party fails to perform their part of the contract, the other party will try to mediate first, and then the party who loses is going to pay all fees on behalf of the winning party. That's what these 3 paragraphs say. Escrow, basically this is saying that the title company again is an escrow agent, not party to the contract. And then this stipulates how they handle issues if things arise. So if all of a sudden your buyer is backing out and the seller's not releasing earnest money, you're going to come read paragraph 18 and know how that's going to be handled, what you need to do. Representation basically is saying everything's in writing. There's not going to be anything verbal. And that we have the right to accept backup offers. There, you're putting the buyer on notice that the seller can take backup offers. Federal requirements. If the seller's a foreign person, they're subject to a tax. And basically this is stating, like, pay attention to that. If your buyer is buying a property from they suspect a foreign person, get me involved. We got to talk about it. Notices on here, paragraph 21, you must put your buyer's information on here. It should not be yours. Your email will go down here, but your buyer phone number and emails need to be on here. If you get an offer, you need to add them for your seller. I never want a contract executed in our paperwork missing your client's information. It can be missing the other agent's client's information. That's on them, but your client's information must be on here. And if we have time at the end, I will tell you about a very, very expensive problem that happened as a result of this not being on there. Okay, paragraph 22, agreement of parties. This is where we're adding addendums to make it part of the contract. Let's say I needed the third-party financing addendum, but I failed to mark it here. It is not part of the contract. We do not have third-party protection. That is a big problem. If I need the refrigerator negotiated, I'm adding it on and I'm marking other and making it non-realty item addendum added on here. I don't know why non-realty isn't in the list of addendums, but it's not. If we're doing a lease back, seller's temporary lease is here. There's other addendums that you probably won't use very often on here. So it's really important that all applicable addendums are marked when you write the offer and include them in the paperwork. But if we need to add an addendum once this is cast in stone and we've executed, then we're going to do an amendment. An amendment says that now paragraph 22 includes the seller's temporary residential lease, or it includes the non-realty item addendum because now in the option period we negotiated the fridge and washer dryer in lieu of repairs or something. Okay, so if we're adding an addendum after the fact, we're doing an amendment and an addendum. Paragraph 23 says consult an attorney. Make sure you verbally say you can consult an attorney. Okay. Here's our execution date. So let's say I sent in an offer yesterday. We negotiate back and forth. The agent whose clients initial the last initials to the changes, any changes to that original offer will require initials by all parties. So unless you execute the exact offer the way I send it, we are initialing any changes. The agent whose clients initial the last change is the agent who will execute this date and fill in this date. There must be a date the minute that's done. Now, here's the exception to that. If my client signs off at 11 o'clock at night, I have to, when it executes, I have to deliver notice to the other party that we've accepted and finalized the contract. Acceptance notice has to be done on that same day. But at 11 o'clock at night, I can't talk to the other agent. I'm not calling the other agent. I'm not waking them up. I cannot execute that date. If they sign at 11 o'clock at night, I need to execute it for the next morning. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? So if it's late at night, just execute it the next day. The date you can deliver notice of acceptance. But again, we're filling it in. If for some reason the other agent was the last one to initial changes and they deliver to title and me without this date in there, you will immediately reply all and say, hey, title, please execute it for today's date, whatever date was that it was emailed. It is up to the agent to execute it, but some agents do not do their job. So just make sure you pay attention to that. It needs to be executed. All right, this second to last page, page 10, is where you're going to put your information here and the other agent information here. If you're the buyer, if you're the seller, then it's flip-flopped. Please go ahead and check and MLS to get the data to put in as much as you can for the other agent. It's kind of a courtesy to do that. And so you want to start the transaction off on the right foot. You're trying to be professional. You're trying to show that you know what you're doing. So get all this information correct. And I'll help you fill out where to get all that information. Down at the bottom, if for some reason the agent has said, hey, when you write the offer, your commission is part of my listing agreement and not part of the contract, then your commission would go down here that the other agent's going to pay it. But then we're adding an additional form to the contract, which is the broker-to-broker compensation form. Don't worry about that too much right now. Just note that that's commission for listing agreements. It's very rarely done anymore. It's usually on paragraph 12, but just note, again, I'll help you with that. Okay, real quick, I'm going to scare you with a story and then we'll do any more questions. This last page are receipts the title company uses. You don't do anything on this page. You just deliver it, make sure it's part of the contract. So we talked about a second ago, notices. 21, my agent did not put the client's information here. She didn't put any information there. And the buyer wrote an offer on a very expensive property, and it was a cash and a quick close, okay? So I'm going to throw out dates. This was a while ago, but let's say we got the offer on Wednesday. We executed on Thursday. No, let's back it up. We got the offer like on Monday, negotiated Tuesday. And it was cash quick close. The buyer was portraying themselves as, we really want this property, it's beautiful, but we need it in 2 weeks because we're gonna be homeless. Can you get out of your home within 2 weeks? And our seller was willing to do it for this offer because it was such a great offer. But what happened was that the buyer never delivered their earnest money to title in those 3 days. Title immediately emailed all parties on this notices. But because my agent didn't put their client's email on there, the clients did not get the email. My agent was out of town the day she got the email, and missed it, and didn't come back to the office till Monday to read it, in which over that period, that weekend, the sellers moved out, went and leased another home and moved out of this huge expensive house, signed a lease, did all the things and got out. Come to find out Monday, title has no earnest money. The buyer went totally MIA. The buyer went and bought something else. Or the buyer was bogus, we really don't know. My seller then came after us because we failed to tell them that the earnest money wasn't delivered in those 3 days, And hey, that should be a red flag, and maybe don't move out of the house and sign another lease, let's hold off. That's what should have happened. But my agent missed the email, had no idea that happened. And the email wasn't delivered to the clients because we didn't put the client's info in the space. Does everybody get how important that space is for the client's info to be there? Big, really important. Like that's a hard rule, no contract without client information on there. Okay. Whether you're the seller or the buyer. Again, if you get an offer, your seller's info won't be there because the other agent doesn't know to put it there. You're gonna have to put it on there. All right, what questions do you have? I know that's a lot. This is recorded. You can watch it 100 times. You know, like I talk about in Set Up for Success, I think, or a new agent training, you guys just want to start learning one page at a time. Read through it one day, read through it again the next day, then go on to page 2. If there's no questions, I'll let you all go. I hope this was helpful. I know it's a lot. Hang in there. Don't let it freak you out. I'll be there to help, but
Thanks, Carlin.
Yeah, thank you, Carlin. Thank you also for the examples. That helps. a lot.
good. Yeah, and just so you guys know, on the portal, I've put in an example of a buyer rep completed and a listing agreement completed that are the newer versions, and they're in the portals under buyer or sellers. So those are need them. Oh, Crystal, I just saw a question you asked. Let's see. Would it be okay to put 45 days and be able to close sooner? Yes, on the contract closing date. The thing is, the lender's kind of the one that dictates it. And if you put 45 days, but you really want the lender to close sooner, you're gonna have to make sure you get their buy-in to close sooner. And sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. So if all parties agree and the lender's ready, absolutely you can close sooner, but that's just something to think about. The lender's gotta be ready. Good question. All right. Hope this was helpful. Have a good day. New agents, I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.